Tonight's webinar, Interviewing Tips and Tricks, is presented by Katie McGoon. She is a brother from Eastern Illinois, and she is a human resources specialist, and I'm sure she will introduce more about herself. So I will turn it over to you, Katie.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. Thank you. And thank you all for taking time to join. I know particularly as a student, this is a really important webinar and can be really helpful to help you guide along. So Heather mentioned that I, in the HR space, I actually have spent my entire career in human resources. I spent 15 of those years at Progressive Insurance, and 12 of those were actually as the recruiting director for all of their claims and contact center hiring across the country. So my team at the time was responsible for anywhere from about 8,000 to 10,000 hires externally on an annual basis. And so have just a little bit of experience on the recruiting side and always love to share that knowledge with folks that are trying to get ready for their first interview and then maybe not their first, maybe they're many, like maybe they've been doing this and they've been struggling and want some advice and thoughts. So in addition to Progressive Insurance, 6 years ago, I took a running leap off of the corporate cliff and started my own HR consulting firm. Started from kind of square one, really focused on supporting small to mid-sized clients who are big enough to need HR, but not big enough to have someone in-house. And we've grown the business over the last 6 years, and I now have the wonderful opportunity to have 7 full-time folks on my team in the consulting space, 3 of which are recruiters. And so I was actually able to pull on them for some tips and tricks for you all tonight, of especially in Zoom world and all of the evolution that has been recruiting. Giving people, making sure that we're giving you some of the most up-to-date information along the way. So I've been Delta Sig from Eastern Illinois. I've spent many, many years in the volunteer space as an alumni, mostly doing training and facilitation of leadership development and HR kind of topics for folks. So it's definitely a passion of mine, and I'm super excited to have you all here tonight. I would love for us to have the opportunity to have this interactive. And if you're like me, you've probably possibly been on some Zoom calls today for school. So, but if you wouldn't mind, even if you don't want to turn on your video, if you wouldn't mind, as I ask some questions, chime in, because in reality, again, while I have lots of information to share, I want to make sure this is actually something you can use. And interviewing is one of those things that you're often here tonight because you're either super nervous about what you're about to head into because you haven't had the opportunity to interview yet, or on the flip side, you have given this some attempts and there's some things that you're struggling with and you're challenged with. And I really want to make sure that we make this useful time for you. So again, if you would like to, please turn on your videos. Even if you don't, I would love for people to chime in with answers and responses. The last thing you all need after a long day of classes is somebody just talking to you more without you having the chance to interact. So please don't hesitate to chime in. With that in mind, I am going to go ahead and jump into some materials, and I am going to take the big risk on a webinar and kick this off with getting some feedback from all of you. I would love to hear, what are the biggest challenges that each of you are currently facing in terms of interviewing? Where do you feel like, either something is completely unknown, or you've tried something and you're running into challenges and you need some help prepping? And part of the reason I ask this is it gives me the opportunity to cater everything I share from here to make sure we're really meeting your needs. So first of all, if folks would be happy, we're a small group, so you can take yourself off mute and just chime in, or feel free, if you're not comfortable doing that and you prefer to write things in chat, feel free to put those in chat for me. But we would absolutely love to hear, what are some of the challenges that you currently face, or just things you're not sure about that you want to make sure we cover during tonight's conversation?
I think one thing that would be really helpful is, I guess, recent graduates having their internships canceled their junior and senior year of COVID. Really, trying to sell yourself to hiring managers and really get that job that you love. I know I've had to go down a path that started somewhere that was not where I wanted to be, but it got me to where I wanted to be. So just some more tips for, new graduates who kind of went through that COVID era where their internships were canceled, and how to really sell yourself and still be transparent even though your internships were canceled, and you have lack thereof experience.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you, Caitlin. Great perspective. And I've got lots of things I can kind of share along the way. Some experiences of my own of folks that I've been mentoring with.
I think a good thing that I want to like learn is like, what do you do when you walk in the interview room? Like, should you just say like, hi, like introduce yourself right away, shake their hands, or like, what is the least awkward way to like, for people that are kind of awkward, like what is the least awkward way to go, like just to walk in there and like present yourself? Because I know that sometimes like if you go too strong, it's like can be a little bit intimidating to the panel, but if you don't say anything, you don't want to be rude. I think that's something that I definitely going into next week, I have like a sales competition and I'm kind of nervous about it, so just like what to do when I just walk in there.
That's fantastic. That's a great question, Claire. And it's interesting, even as I was putting together some of the slides for tonight, one of the slides I put together was on like getting ready for Zoom interviews, because for years that was everybody's like, oh my gosh, what do I do when it's on video? And so I spent like this much time on it because I actually figure we may need to spend more time for folks kind of in this graduating time now. You've probably done the Zoom interview, like you could do that in your sleep. While I would not recommend it, you could, but that experience of walking in for that first time, sitting in an interview, thinking about what that looks like, could be very new to you. So great. I'm glad I wasn't crazy when I thought about that, Claire, of that being something that you all need to talk about. So we'll definitely jump in there. Other thoughts, things you're hoping to get out of tonight? It looks like we've got one in the chat. Asking best questions at the end of the interview. Yes, this is that horrible time when they say, what questions do you have? And suddenly you're a little stumped. I've got some great ones in this conversation for you tonight to just use as, easy ways. It's not overly pushy, but it does absolutely let you into the space. So great. Feel free as we're going along. Again, interrupt me through your hand, do the raised hand from your reactions thing. Throw something in the chat. So I said I'm a consultant. I was just telling Heather before this, I literally facilitated 2 client workshops yesterday, 3 hours each. I did another one today for 3 hours. I facilitate all the time, and the interaction is the key. So you are not going to throw me. You're not going to stump me. You might stump me, but we'll come up with an answer together. But you're not going to throw me off if you just raise your hand or interrupt in the middle. So please do not feel like you just have to like listen and take it all in. But we are going to really make sure that you are set up for success. One of the first things that I tell candidates, regardless of like, you can do all the prep in the world in advance of the interview, whether it be in person or, or on Zoom. You can think you're totally ready, but there is one tip that nobody ever teaches you before you go in the interview that can make all of the difference. And it is one simple sentence that I tell myself, hopefully every single day, but it is a great reminder before you go into the interview. And it's as simple as oxygen to the brain is good. And while that seems super obvious, we very rarely, you're going to go into your first interviews and you're going to be super nervous. And you're going to be thinking about, did I practice this? Do I have the questions right? What do I do when I walk in? Before you ever get there, one of the best interview tips I can give you is get wherever you need to be. If it's in person, get to the parking lot plenty in advance. If it's a Zoom call, sit in the chair you're going to be in plenty in advance and just sit. If it's in your car, sit in the car, radio off. If it's before Zoom, like sit in your chair and just take some huge deep breaths in and exhale. Because the thing you need to do before any interview, regardless of how confident are you feeling beforehand, is you need to bring your heart rate and your blood pressure down. Because when you get into the interview, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get, whether you thought you were nervous or not, is it's automatically going to go up. And one of the things that we teach all the time when we talk about human interactions is if on a daily basis, this is where your heart rate is, and it raises, then you're a little bit more stressed and a little bit more panicked. But going into an interview, you're kind of automatically here from the get-go. So if you can bring that down even a little closer to normal, then as you get nervous, it's only going to go up a little bit, but you're not going to lose train of thought. you're still going to have confidence. You're still going to feel a lot more comfortable than if you just walk in raw from your last class, or you come flying in and you just sit down and you have to have that Zoom interview, or you show up at the last minute and you haven't had a chance to just breathe. You don't set yourself up for as much as success. So while I'm going to teach you a whole bunch of like hardcore, here's how you prepare for an interview, I will tell you, most people who take my sessions over the years, and there have been a lot of students that have taken my interview skill sessions over the years, the one thing they always tell me is, Katie, you told me to breathe and breathe before. And when you get nervous in the interview, just breathe. Bring the heart rate back down, get centered, get focused, and that will make a huge difference to the ability, as Caitlin said in here, like you've got to think of this as a conversation. And when you have not had enough time to bring your heart rate down, it's really hard to have a conversation. And so centering and getting focused beforehand is a wonderful thing. If you tend to get particularly nervous, think about downloading an app on your phone like Calm or Headspace. A lot of them have these apps that have just quick breathing exercises that will bring your heart rate down beforehand. So if you're particularly prone to getting super anxious during an interview, try one of those before you go in. It will really help you out. It'll just make everything a whole lot easier. All right, so that was like the most basic advice, right? Because we all know oxygen to the brain is good, but we do forget to take nice deep breaths. But where I really want to start is this concept of behavioral interviewing. And many of you get exposed to this in college, but I'm actually going to give you a slightly different perspective, because I can actually give you the perspective of how do we teach this as HR professionals when we teach hiring managers to do this. So you kind of get the insider's view. And you get such the insider's view that I actually took slides directly from slides that I use to train my clients. And I'm literally going to walk you through the philosophy behind this from the reverse angle. Because while somebody will tell you the general concept of behavioral interviewing, they won't necessarily tell you the art and science behind exactly how to prep for it and how to stand out compared to your peers. Even if they don't ask, even if you're in an interviewing setting and they don't ask a behavioral question, how do you leverage this concept to make sure that your experiences do come through and are genuine, but they come through louder than everyone else's? So here is one of the key concepts behind behavioral-based interviewing. It's the reason behavioral-based interviewing is so successful in finding our best candidates. And the whole concept behind why people keep asking you, tell me about a time when you're on the candidate side, you want to like, you're ready to poke your eyeballs out because you're so over that particular question. The reason is because interviewers who know how to do this understand that your past behavior predicts your future behavior. And this is particularly important when you're going into an interview and maybe you haven't had all of the experience that somebody else may have, right? Maybe as Caitlin said, your internship got canceled and those types of things. What your interviewers are actually looking for is, it's not necessarily about, I had 3 years at this job or I did this at an internship. What you really need them to understand is, based on your past behaviors, your competencies, this is how you've handled situations in the past, whether that be in leadership roles in your chapter or other volunteer groups you've been a part of, or how you worked in a school project. What you want to walk away with is making sure that they understand, here's how I have handled certain situations in the past, and here's what that means for where I will head and how I will handle things in the future. Now we're going to talk more in depth about how to actually do that. So the first piece that we teach interviewers is that there are 3 key factors that you want to identify from a candidate. When you're trying to figure out who your top candidate is, 1, you need to understand their technical knowledge. How much do they know and how much specific experience do they have in the role? Now, the good part is, as a student or a recent graduate, the reality is a lot of the roles you're going to apply for, they might not care as much about your specific technical knowledge in the workplace. So you can use this concept of past behavior predicting future behavior to be talking about school projects. things you've learned in class, projects where you had to apply your learnings, in addition to any experiences you may have had in an internship, or even just whether it was an internship or just a part-time job in the summers, taking those opportunities. Volunteer experiences can also provide you technical knowledge along the way. The second piece that they're looking for is competencies. Competencies refers to it's not about what did you learn from a book, but it's what are you good at? What are you really masterful at? I'll use a personal example. My niece is currently in college. She just started she is on her sophomore year of college. And in her sophomore year class, she had one of her sophomore classes, she had to write her first resume. My niece has never worked. She has been in lots of extracurricular activities and sports and things like that, but she's never had even a part-time position. And here she was having to write her first resume. Luckily, she has an aunt who knows a little bit about this. So we got on the phone on a Saturday afternoon, and rightfully so, she was super nervous. She's like, where do I put? I have no work experience to fill in this whole section that I'm supposed to. And so we started talking about, I said, what are you good at? What do you feel like are your biggest strengths? And actually they had done some strength finders work. So she had things there that she could actually pull out, not just a fluff that she thought, but she could pull on things from her strength finders book that she was like, here's what it said I was great at. And then we started to find from projects she's been on, from extracurricular things she's done, what are examples of those things? So we took a very different approach to, in this case, it was her resume, but the same concept works in your interviews. Think about, and we're going to talk about how to figure out what are the competencies they likely will care about for this role, and then make sure that you go in prepared to share how have you demonstrated those particular competencies in the past. The third thing they're looking for is motivational fit and organizational fit. And I'm going to teach you some really easy ways to figure out how to answer these questions. But most importantly, there is one key factor that I cannot stress enough in interviewing, because this will make the difference on how you feel, whether or not you feel successful. And here's the key. When you go into an interview, don't get so focused on, did I get the job? And instead focus on, tell them who you really are. Because the reality is the goal of interviewing isn't just to get the job. It's to get the job you want. And so if you go in being so focused on, I wanted to make sure they thought I was a good fit and blah, blah, blah. And so you tell them a whole bunch of things that aren't really what you love doing or aren't really what you hate doing. You could get the job, but you might get the job that you're going to hate. So as we talk about this, a lot of your preparation is really about spending time self-reflecting beforehand, so that as you go into the interview, when it's the job you really want, you're going to be so prepared and you are going to shine through as the best possible candidate for it. And more importantly, when it turns out it's not the job that you want, because maybe it wouldn't cater to your strengths. Maybe you'd end up spending the entire time kind of overcoming the things that you're okay at, but you're not wonderful at. Or maybe they make you spend a lot of time doing the thing you don't want to do. And I know it's super scary when you're coming up on graduation or you're coming up on your first internship. Everybody's like, you've got this interview, you've got to get it, you've got to get it. Somehow, some way, hopefully with a little bit of extra oxygen to the brain, keep focused on, it's not whether or not you get the job, it's about whether or not you get the job you want. And so don't overemphasize just saying whatever you want to just to get there. And so I think that's an important piece to kind of keep in mind along the way. So let's talk about, how do you get to the next step from that perspective? So when we teach interviewers this concept of behavioral-based interviewing, and this idea that past behavior predicts future behavior, that's why they keep asking you all of these questions about, tell me about a time when. So if somebody is good at behavioral-based interviewing, they know that when I ask you, tell me about a time when, I want a very specific example. Because the way I'm going to predict your future behavior is understanding what did you do the last time. And so your job in preparing for the interview, any interview, is figuring out what are the skills they're likely to be looking for, and what are all of the examples in your background that you can pull from that would show that those are your areas of strength. The great part is there is an easy process to go about doing this. And the even better part is you don't start from scratch every single time that you start to prepare these, because this is a building block of examples that goes on through life. And I will tell you, every time you interview for a job, you should go through, and even when you don't, if I made the mistake, I was at the same company for a very long time, and I hadn't been through any interviews because I just kept getting promoted. So I didn't do any interview prep. And then I had to interview for when I got promoted for. I'm like, oh, that's like 10 years of examples I've got to think about. So even just on an annual basis, as part of your performance evaluation going forward, take time to think through this process and start a stack of cards, index cards, that you will always have going forward. But here's what you do with those cards. The first thing you do is you need to identify what are the competencies for this role that are going to be most important to the person doing the hiring. So if I talk about, for example, a customer service position, if I'm hiring for just a customer service rep position, what do you think are the most, what are some of the competencies? What are some of the skill sets that you think somebody should be really good at if they were going to be a customer service rep? Feel free to holler them out, put them in the chat, whatever you want. Handling conflict, great, Caitlin.
Being very like sensitive to different kinds of backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also being like still being an accountable person, and also very much holding other people accountable, and being also very trustworthy, because like if you want to be good with like public and stuff like that, like you got to be a trustworthy person that's not just going to go gossip.
Right, absolutely. Got somebody else through in chat: communication skills, handling conflict, all of these kinds of things, right? So there's a lot of things that go into this. So by spending time on the front end, putting yourself in the hiring manager's shoes and thinking about what makes a good customer service rep. I need to be customer focused, right? I have to be centered on the person on the other side of whether it be the phone or in retail space, the other side of the conversation. They need to be empathetic. You need to be able to solve problems. You need to be a good decision maker, and you have to be able to handle stress. Now, the great part as you go out and maybe are looking for your first internship or your first job, or maybe it's even your second job, and you're like, oh, do I have enough experience? The cool part about the way behavioral-based interviewing works is when we're focused on demonstrating the competencies, we don't have to get so stuck in, I've done this for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. Instead, I can focus on, let me tell you about an example where I was particularly empathetic for a client. Let me tell you an example of where my decision-making skills were really strong. So you don't need 10 years of an example, you need a couple of really strong examples along the way. So your job in preparing for the interview, first and foremost, is to just stop and think. Don't worry about what question might they ask, but instead think about what are the competencies that if I were hiring for this role, I would care about. Now, I will tell you a trick. If you Google on the internet and say like competencies, there are all sorts of websites that will give you a long list of competencies. So you can start to pick out, if you're not sure what the right terms would be or like what the concepts would be, you can easily get this information to get you started in thinking about, so what are the examples I particularly have? And that's your second step. Now you have to, and this is actually a lot harder because now you have to remember things that have happened in your lifetime and how you handled them, and come up with examples that would fit different versions of tell me about a time when. Now, let me warn you in advance. If you have, how many of you, raise of hands, and they can be hands in reactions, how many of you have been in a behavioral-based interview before? No one. And one. Okay. Couple. Very few. Here is something that if you have not been through this experience before, here's something you should know. When you are not prepared for it, and somebody says, tell me about a time when, and they push you for a very specific example. I tell my interviewers this all the time. And if you've never been in the seat, you don't understand it. But what happens to the candidate who's not prepared is that every memory you've ever had in your entire life that could relate to that scenario comes rushing to the front of your head all at the same time. It hits the front of your brain, which reverberates against the front of your skull, and it shakes it up. And you can't think of anything. You couldn't even tell somebody how you brushed your teeth that morning, even though you know you did. So this is again where one, oxygen to the brain is good. So when that happens and somebody stumps you, you don't panic, you just breathe, because that will help settle the brain in from bouncing around in your head and calm you down. But more importantly, by doing this prep that we're talking about before the interview, you will have already thought of so many examples. And so even if they ask you about an example from a competency you aren't prepared for, you will already sort of be able to mentally go through this stack of cards of examples you've thought about and be like, oh, you know what? That one that I thought was a really great customer service example also works for a decision-making example. Also maybe works for an analytics example or a detail orientation example. So the hard part of prep is, and it's not really hard other than you have to rack your brain for specific situations, but the goal is just to think through your memories and what are the times that you demonstrated those skills that are your strengths, and how did you demonstrate that? By using your volunteer experiences, by using, if you had the opportunity to have an internship program or a part-time job or a leadership role on an athletic team, it doesn't matter what it comes from. Your job is to focus on finding the memories that remind you, this is how I know this is a strength for me, so that you can share that with others. So it makes a huge difference to spend time doing this. I literally have taught, again, I've mentored even people who are late in their careers on getting ready for interviews or preparing people that I knew on my team were ready for promotion and I was trying to get them prepared. One of the first things I told them is just sit down and write through every school project you ever completed, every internship you ever had, and what were the skills that you were best at in that, and what were examples of those. And buy the little index card, you can get them at Walgreens, they're like this big, and start to write those examples out, because what you will find is they will mix and match with different competencies, and then you'll have the information you need to share. Now, here's the second piece to know is how do you share that information? So it's one thing to know what you want to share, but there's actually a format that will resonate best with interviewers. So when they lead with, tell me about a time when, what they're looking for is a very specific example. So not, oh, I do that all of the time, and when I do it, here's what I do. You want to get really, really specific. Well, last week, Mrs. Smith came into my retail location. That's your situation or your task. So you want to think about sharing a star for every tell me about a time when question that you get from an interviewer. So we start with the situation or task. Mrs. Smith came in last week. My class project in my Accounting 1 course, here's what happened. You start with that piece. Then you want to spend time outlining the actions that you took. And specifically, you want to outline those actions that align with the competency that we thought of in step 1 to show how what you did demonstrated strength in that particular competency. Now, oftentimes I will see people in their interviews, they spend so much time on the situation and task, and then they get to the action and they're like, well, Mrs. Smith came in last week and she was really upset. I asked the follow-up question, so how did you handle that? And they go, oh, well, I just resolved it for her. You didn't tell me that you have the competency to do it. So you have to walk me through specifically what actions you took. And those actions need to demonstrate that you were extremely customer focused in your approach, or that you showed empathy in your approach. Then you follow up with the result. But I will tell you, in the end, the result is far less important. The actions is what are key. So I'll share an example, and it's interesting to put this in perspective. This example came from a college candidate who was interviewing at Progressive. It was easily 15 years ago, and I can still quote the example 15 years later. And when you hear how basic this answer was, you're going to be like, how did that resonate? And the reason it resonated is because this candidate, with this very specific but very simple answer, had a room full of hiring managers arguing over which one of them was going to get to hire this person. So here's the example, and I can guarantee you it would work today the same way. This was a college student, senior year in college, applied for a claims rep position. We hired entry-level claims reps right out of college with absolutely no experience, just wanted good customer service skills, decision-making skills, and critical thinking. So the question was, tell me about a time you went above and beyond, tell me about a time you solved a difficult problem for a customer. Candidate had been working at Honey Baked Ham as a part-time job. They were working Easter weekend at Honey Baked Ham. For the record, if you've never been at Honey Baked Ham on Easter weekend, it's a zoo. It is absolutely insane. Candidate is working one register, cashing somebody out, and their peer is standing next to them, and that peer's customer is mad, yelling, screaming. We'll call her Anna because that's the easiest name. I can't even remember her first name, but everybody loved her and everybody wanted to hire her. Anna finishes with her customer, recognizes her peers in trouble, and turns over and says, is there anything I can do to help? Customer's super upset, and customer's like, they can't find my order. I ordered a 14-pound ham, and you don't have it, and I have it reserved, and what am I going to do? I have a house full of people coming. She is like spitting nails mad. Everybody has been running around in the back trying to find this 14-pound ham. No 14-pound ham anywhere, and certainly not one that wasn't already claimed. Her peer is standing there like very shaken by the experience and trying to explain, like, ma'am, I'm sorry, we don't have your reservation. We don't have your ham. I don't know, I don't know what to tell you. Anna steps in and says, ma'am, may I just ask you a question? I don't know that this will solve it, but do I have your permission to ask a follow-up question? Customer's like, I don't care what you do, find my 14-pound ham. Anna says, ma'am, I don't know that we have a 14-pound ham, but if I could get you 2 7-pound hams, would that solve the problem? And the customer and everybody, she tells the story, everybody goes, oh, like, duh, right? 2 7-pound hams, likely the same as 14-pound hams, but it solved the problem. That is the most simple example. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be complex. But from that one example, the hiring managers took away cool under pressure, willing to jump in and help a teammate in a really tough spot, asked smart questions to truly understand the customer's issue, and then came up with a solution that, while it seemed easy, nobody else who was running around the store like crazy had figured it out. The 14-pound ham that turned into 2 7-pound hams had 3 branches in Florida who were all very close to where this candidate was going to live, arguing over who was going to get to hire her. It's that easy. But all it takes is the preparation up front to think about, when did you have the customer that you went above and beyond for? When did you have the team project that was particularly difficult to get people to collaborate? When did you have to put your decision-making skills to work to come up with a tough decision? And whether it be from your internship or your school projects or your volunteer work or your athletics, or just even Like in my niece's example, like school's not easy for her. She has poured her life into studying to get where she is. And guess what? She's doing fabulous, but she doesn't have time for all the extra stuff. But man, can she show determination and stick-to-itiveness like no other human being I've ever met. So think about what your strengths are. Be prepared to tie them to what it takes to do the job. And then think about the moments in your life where you did the best possible job you could of demonstrating those. And then think about telling them in the same format I just told you about the 14-pound ham, the situation and task, what were the actions you took, and what was the result. And again, your action section should be the longest, because that should be the part where they go, oh, she demonstrated empathy. Oh, she asked great questions. She helped out a peer. Not worrying about whether or not it was a 14-pound ham or a 17 or a 7-pound ham. Let me stop there, because that piece is usually like a lot of unpacking and just questions for folks. Let me stop there for a moment. Are there any questions about this concept of figuring out the competencies, building a star, and how to kind of get prepared from that perspective? Feel free to either write them in the chat, raise your hand, just shout it out, whatever you like. Okay, I'll keep moving. One of the things to know, and this is the wonder, especially if you're in virtual world and you're doing a Zoom interview, here's a cool tip with this. All those index cards that I told you about can also be pieces of paper. But if you are in virtual space, you can put them out in front of you, just cards with your examples. Split the card into 3 rows. What was my situation? What were my actions? What were my results? So if they ask you a question that maybe you were expecting customer service and they ask you decision-making and you go, ooh, I don't have that. And you look down, you can quickly see your examples and be like, ooh, I wasn't thinking of that as decision-making, but it works. And you can start to remember and remind yourself as you go. I tell this story all the time. One year I had one of my employees at Progressive was going for a promotion and she had to interview with me. And I was her boss at the time. That was awkward by any stretch of the imagination. And we get on Zoom and I had my camera on, and this goes back, so we didn't do this a lot. And I was like, you know, Tina, feel free to turn your camera on if you would like to. And she's like, would you like me to? And I said, well, why do you say that? She's like, well, to be honest, my wall is covered with pieces of paper with all of my star examples, and I'm pulling them off as I go so that I can remember what examples I shared with which interviewer. So again, it's just a great way to organize yourself as you're going along and to keep them, even when you're in person, it just helps you kind of calm that pressure right before you go in to start to visually see, oh, that's right, I had examples written down beforehand. So great tool to get you ready. The third piece you want to do is think about this concept of motivational fit and organizational fit. And again, remember, this is all about, don't just try to get the job, make sure it's actually one you really want. And the best way to prepare for this is to spend time thinking about what are the things you really like to do and what are the things you hate to do. One of my team members, interestingly enough, she just left my organization in the last 30 days. Because as we had this conversation, she was really good at a lot of things. The problem was the things that she loved to do the most, we didn't have enough of. But if you like doing something and this role is going to get to do it a lot, you're going to be really happy in that job. And those are the kinds of things that you want to share when somebody says, what did you like most about that job? You want to share the things that you really do like the most. Because even if they aren't the same things they need you to like, it will make sure you don't take the job you don't want to have. So if I like doing a job and I get to do it all the time, I'm going to be really happy. And that's what the interviewer is looking for. If I don't like doing something and I have to do it all the time, I'm going to end up hating the job. So the interviewer is evaluating your answers to questions on like, what do you like doing the most? What do you hate doing? What did you like about that job? What did you dislike? The reason they're asking those questions is they are trying, if they're doing it right, they are trying to figure out where do you fall in this grid for this particular role. If I never get to do something that I hate doing, I'm super happy, right? That's my best day ever. But if I like doing something and I also never get to do it, I'm going to end up being unhappy in the long run. So your job in preparation for the interview is to spend time thinking about what are the things you love to do and what are the things you hate doing, and being really clear on that. Then you can research for each individual role, for each individual company, how often are you going to get to do those kinds of things? So that as you are in the interview, if it's something you love doing and they're saying you're going to get to do it all the time, then it's really easy to talk about things that are examples of situations where you've done that, you've loved it, and here's why. And now it's going to be clear to them that this is a really good fit for you. And so that's really kind of the combination of discussions you're trying to put together, is engaging them in a conversation that allows that to come through. But you first have to do your homework to think about, what is it I'm going to love doing and what is it I don't like as much? If you don't love being in front of customers and they want you to be in a retail environment, you're probably not going to be able to sell yourself for that. Or worse yet, you do sell yourself for it and then you end up with a job you hated. So this is a great one. It also builds directly into what questions do you ask at the end of the interview. So this is particularly important because the best questions you can ask help align whether or not you feel like you're going to be a great fit for the role. So questions like, what do people love about this job? You hopefully have already done your homework on what do I like doing a lot and what do I dislike? So finding out the other side of that, what are you going to do a lot of and what are you never going to get, should help fill this in. And the great part is these questions also convey to the person on the other side, I'm not just looking for any job, I'm looking for the job that's going to be the right fit for me. In addition, as they give you answers to these questions, it feeds you opportunities to say, when I say, what do people love about this job? And somebody says, well, you know what? You get a ton of variety in what you do and no 2 days are the same. And that opens it up for me as a candidate to say, that's fantastic, because you know what? One of the things I loved about this job that I had part-time in the summers was every time I came in, something new was coming at me. And here's what that looked like. And here's what I loved about it the most. And here's why I was so good at it. So by answering the questions, they actually open the door for you to continue to share examples, whether they were requested or not, to share examples that allow you to cater to your strengths. So these are some great, and again, it doesn't matter what they've told you, these will help you build into that and really have a leg up on those answers. All right, so before I go into just tips and tricks for like in the moment kind of stuff, I want to stop there again. Any questions on this behavioral interviewing side of things and how to prepare from that perspective for the interview setting? Feel free to put it in chat. Okay, I think we're good to go. Perfect. All right. So here's a couple of things. We're going to start with the Zoom interview because for most of you, this is at least going to be step one. The picture on this one, the meme, is one of my favorites of all time, especially for those of us who have weird HR humor. It's just a matter of time before somebody in one of my clients' offices actually does show up in the Superwoman outfit. But there's a couple of reasons why dressing for the job you want is important. So first and foremost, test your technology on Zoom. Test it before, even if you've used it every single day, test it anyway. Get on Zoom, get on your Zoom line, make sure your camera is working, make sure your camera angle is good. You don't want people like looking up your nose during the interview, all of that kind of stuff. That's really important. The second piece is you want to make sure the setting you're in is conducive for this conversation. So, and I don't just mean like, yes, you want a quiet setting with no distractions, but most importantly, this is one of our biggest challenges today in virtual world. We've all gotten really used to virtual world. And so when this all first started, it was like, ooh, even though I'm virtual, I still am going to wear my suit and I'm going to wear my suit from top to bottom. And that's what I'm going to do. And now we put on a jacket, but we might still have our yoga pants on, right? Here is why I don't recommend that. First of all, every once in a while, you will get a hiring manager who decides to play this out, and they will actually ask you to stand to make sure you took the interview seriously. It's rare, but it will happen. But more importantly, when we dress the part, we act the part. So I don't care if you are dressed to the nines from here up. The minute the yoga pants go on, you get more casual. Versus if you were going in for an in-person interview, I guarantee you would not wear your jacket and your suit coat and your yoga pants. And it would immediately, while it might make you nervous, it also will raise, it will change your posture, it will change the way you sit, and it will change your mindset. So this piece of it is actually less about what the interviewer cares about and more about putting your brain in the mindset of, I'm in an interview and this is serious, because it will help connect your brain to your thought process and your mindset. So take it seriously and act like you're going in the office, even if you're on the Zoom interview. This is something we've seen a lot with candidates lately. Because we're so used to Zoom, we're getting more and more casual, which can be okay, but it also, especially in your space where you're really trying to leave a good impression, the more you have taken this seriously, you will resonate, you will stand out to folks who maybe didn't know this piece of advice. So once you've acted the part and you're ready, like you're in office, sit in a good chair. Sit, like, don't sit on your couch. Don't sit in your, your armchair. Either use a standing desk or sit at like, if it's your desk in your dorm room, that's okay too. But like, sit in a real spot so that you have to sit as though you were in front of somebody in an interview, because it will help you interact as though you are in front of somebody in an interview. Make sure you're in a quiet setting without distractions. People are given a lot more grace on this. I have had dogs climb into chairs and cats crawl around somebody's head. Even had one woman who was feeding her 6-month-old baby during the interview. I had a lot of it in Zoom world, but the more you can do this without distractions, the better off you are. And then you've got to think about important things: your lights, your cameras, and your sound. This is really critical, so you want to test it in advance. Lights are important. You don't want to turn into like the black form and nobody can actually see you. Nobody expects you to have high-end professional lighting, so don't misunderstand this, but do at least make sure that they can see you, and be prepared. Even if you're not sure whether they will make you put your camera on, assume that they might. The camera piece is key. One, have a good camera and have it at a height that is reasonable so that you're basically looking the camera in the eye. Do not, it's okay if you use your phone. If you only have Zoom on a phone or an iPad, that is okay, but do not hold your phone and try to do an interview. I had a kid, Heather, you're laughing. I had a candidate who was doing this, and yet she talked with her hands. So she did her entire interview like this, but then she talked with her hands. So she was doing this. At one point I was looking at all I could see was her ceiling. Other times I almost got nauseous. I was so seasick from her camera moving around. So if all you have is your phone, just make sure, put it on something stable, get a tripod, get one of those little cookie things. You can do it, whatever you need to do, but do not try to do an interview holding your phone and having a conversation. No one is steady enough to do it. And yet I will tell you right now, each of my recruiters would probably swear to you that at least once to twice a week, they are getting a candidate who is trying to do their interview while holding a phone. So keep that in mind. Also, make sure that your sound is good. Make sure that they can hear you. Make sure that, again, if you're using your earbuds, make sure they're charged. I've had candidates have that go out on them and so forth before, but make sure you just have good quality sound behind you so that you don't have to worry about all this technology stuff. Again, people are given a lot of grace on this technology piece of it. The problem is it's going to shake you so much that you can't focus on being you. And so most importantly, just make sure none of this is a distraction. And then dress the part head to toe. Even if they never could see your yoga pants, Don't wear them to the interview. All right. I want to, before, a couple of quick things on follow-up, and then I want to talk about this in-person interview piece to make sure that we get to that as well. Please make sure you follow up. It doesn't have to be fancy. Email follow-ups are great. If you can find a way to get them like an actual thank you note, wonderful, because I guarantee you, you are the only person who will try, so it's worth it. But at minimum, an email thank you note. Again, everybody's like, does it really make a difference? The reality is, if I have 3 candidates and only one of them sends the email thank you note, if it's as long as it's well written, I'm like, it will stick out to managers. They will remember it. And they've told us this since I was in college, which was a way long time ago. It still is the same. So many people are not taking the time to do this, that when you do, it makes the difference. The other piece is ask the individual that you are talking to, what do they see as the next steps? You don't have to say, hey, am I the right person for this job? Just simply say, what do you see as the next steps? And what would be an appropriate time for me to check in? Now you're not saying just when are you going to have a decision, but when would be an appropriate time for me to check in on this is really helpful. Recruiting is like being on the recruiter side and the hiring manager side. I got to tell you, as many times as we're well intended to have an answer in 24 or 48 hours, it rarely happens. Don't assume they aren't calling you back. A very politely written, thank you so much for your time last week. I really am interested in this position. I just wanted to check in. Do you have any update at this time, or do you know when next steps might be? No one in their right mind is ever going to be upset or offended by that question. But even better, when you ask at the end of the interview, when would be an appropriate time for me to check in? Now you don't have to play that awkward dating game. Do I look too desperate? Do I feel awkward? Am I making somebody upset? So just ask the question on the front end. Pivoting quickly to make sure we talk about this, what do you do in person piece? Because that is, for many of you, this will be the first time you do this. So Emma, I think, Emma, this was your question, am I right? I think this came from Emma, but I can't remember. So I'll just go into it. Here's the first thing you want to do. Smile. Most importantly, no matter how nervous you are, but you're going to take those deep breaths before you go in, right? Just smile. That will immediately, 1, it will relax you, and 2, it will show confidence and comfort level. The handshake piece is an interesting one because this used to be a given. It used to be smile and stick your hand out to shake somebody's hand. In today's world, everybody is in a slightly different place on this. So follow the lead of the individual that you are meeting with. If they stick out their hand, you can do the same thing. If you're not comfortable, because for COVID reasons, if you are at risk and you don't want to shake a hand, if somebody shakes their hand, people are giving a lot of grace in this space. You could easily, a fist bump would be acceptable. If you're not sure, asking, thank you very much today for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Is a handshake appropriate? That would be perfectly fine to give them the option to opt out. But your interviewers have likely done this enough, and quite honestly, they've done it enough in person that it feels weird for them to be in Zoom. So the in-person stuff is going to come naturally. So they are likely going to just stick their hand out there and lead you right into a nice handshake and a smile. And that will get you through that sort of opening piece. If they don't offer you their hand, assume that it is likely COVID related. And so just simply say, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and smile. And then they will likely direct you to where to sit. And again, sit poised, but sit naturally, be comfortable, take a nice deep breath, and be ready for their conversations. Informal chit chat is always acceptable. So, just be prepared if you're, if things are awkward. Most of the time interviewers will say, did you have any trouble finding this? Are you, did you have any, just talk about the weather. They will talk about all of the really basic stuff. Just be comfortable with minor chit chat along the way. They're not probably judging you on that, but being aware of the fact that they likely will have some of these chit chat conversations is fantastic. If they don't lead with a question, then make it comfortable for yourself and for them. And simply ask, how is your day going today? If they're doing like sales panel interviews, they've probably had a long day. And so, leading with, thank you so much for having me today. How is your day going so far? Get them talking. You don't have to be the only one answering questions. Again, you don't want to like dive at them in interrogation form, but getting it into natural chit chat conversation will put you at ease and will put everybody else at ease as well. Obviously, sit appropriately when you are sitting, which, can be, there's again, not overly judgy. Most people are not paying too much attention, but you are probably dressed more professionally in an in-person piece. So, sitting with your legs either crossed at the ankles or crossed at your knees more appropriately. I have had a couple of candidates over my career who like crossed their ankle at their knee and like leaned back in the chair. You do not want to come off as that informal. You also don't want to come off as like leaning in so far that you're like sitting on, like leaning on their desk. Heather, you laugh, but that's a real example. So something in between. If you're going in person, have something. One of the things you often are worried about is, what do I do with my hands? Tried and true answer is have one of those pad folios that are still a thing all these years later, right? Pad of paper in something, have a pen in it, so that if somebody starts getting you information, you have some place to have notes. But it also, I will tell you, most candidates find it just comforting to have something to hold on to versus the awkwardness of like, I'm here and what do I do with my hands, which as humans is our biggest concern always, is what do I do with my hands? And so those are the kinds of things that you kind of want to think about. The other piece in person that you may want to ask about is masks. Again, mask mandates have changed across the world, but this is something 2 years ago, none of us even ever thought to ask. Simply when you are going into, before your interview, whoever schedules the appointment for you, whether it be a recruiter or an admin or, the hiring manager, out of courtesy, I would tell you still ask the question of what is the company, if we're doing in person, what is the company's mask policy and preference? That way you can do, like, if they are saying we're still doing masks, then you are prepared and you don't get caught off guard. And always, most importantly, your health has to come first. So if you have a personal reason that you are not, when it may just be your own personal comfort, or it may be an actual health reason that you need to wear a mask, don't not wear one and put yourself at risk simply because you think it won't get you the job. I will tell you first and foremost, any company in its right mind right now that is making a decision based on whether or not the candidate wore the mask isn't a company you want to work for. So if you're unsure and you don't care, then simply ask before the interview what the preferred approach is for an in-person meeting. But if it matters to you, if you have a health risk and you need to be careful of, for you or a family member or a loved one, what you need to do to keep yourself safe. Again, any company making a decision based on that, you don't want to work for them in the long run anyway. So, but those are some things to keep in mind. Also, don't worry if when you go to shake, if you walk in and you say hello and you have your smile and all of a sudden there's an awkward moment at the handshake, you don't have to worry about that. 3 years ago, you would have had to, because it would have been a really big deal because they would have expected that not to be awkward. But I will tell you, so many of your hiring managers, it's a very good chance that you are the first round of candidates that they have talked to in person in 2 years. And so any awkwardness there is likely just as much on them as, because they're like, oh, am I supposed to do this? Am I not supposed to do this? So don't put too much pressure on yourself there. Follow their lead, do what you're comfortable with, and you will, again, smile and you'll be good to go. It'll get you through just about anything. And breathe. Oxygen to the brain is good. So I'm going to stop there because we are, Heather, at the top of the hour. I do want to be respectful of people's time. Are there any questions or any topics I didn't get to that I have time. So if you have questions, I want to be sure we get to them. Is there anything I didn't touch on that somebody wants to make sure we address? All right, here is the last offer I will give you. I am on LinkedIn and I am more than happy to respond to messages on LinkedIn. So feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, connect with me. I am happy to get engaged with you. I even have recruiters who would be happy to give you tips and tricks if you ever needed them. But thank you so much for taking time out of tonight. I hope you found this helpful to you. And most importantly, just breathe and enjoy the experience, because it's scary sometimes, but you will look back on this and be always be very happy with where you landed. So best of luck to all of you, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.
Thank